Leave or burn. Mara ripped the notice off. Her door walked inside and lit the stove. She didn't scream. She didn't pack. She laid bread on the iron skillet and started singing the same hymn her mother hummed the night before she died. Her voice carried through the walls past the porch and into the road where a cowboy named Caleb Rourke stood frozen with his hat in his hands. He'd been riding south. He had no reason to stop. But that voice, raw, defiant, aching, sounded like a woman who'd already buried everything except the fight still living in her chest. He didn't ride south. He knocked. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe to the channel and follow Mara's journey all the way to the end. Comment the city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story travels. Dust Creek wasn't the kind of town that forgot things. It was the kind that remembered wrong, twisted details until they fit whatever story made the most people comfortable. And the story they'd built around Mara Ellison was simple. She was the widow who should have left years ago. Her husband, Thomas, had been dead for 4 years. Fever took him in 3 days. One morning he was hauling grain. By Thursday he couldn't lift his head. Saturday Mara buried him behind the house with nothing but a shovel and a prayer she didn't believe anymore. The town sent no one to help dig. She remembered that. She'd always remember that. After Thomas died, Mara kept the house running because that's what her hands knew how to do. She baked bread before dawn. She sold it from a table on her porch for 2 cents a loaf. She spoke to customers only when spoken to, and even then she kept it short. Yes. No. Thank you. That'll be 2 cents. People called her cold. They called her proud. They called her difficult. What they never called her was lonely. But she was. God, she was. The singing started the winter after Thomas passed. Not for an audience. Not even for comfort exactly. More like a reflex, the way a person rocks when there's nothing else to hold on to. She'd stand over that stove flipping bread on the iron skillet, and a melody would climb out of her chest before she could stop it. Old hymns. Lullabies. Songs she couldn't name, but somehow knew all the way through. She never sang when anyone was close enough to hear. That was the rule. Until the morning of the eviction notice. She'd found it at first light, hammered right through the wood with a horseshoe nail. No signature, no seal. Just the threat, and those 3 red words. She didn't need to guess who sent it. Harlan Briggs owned most of the land east of the creek, and he'd been circling her property like a vulture since before Thomas's body was cold. Mara carried the notice inside, set it on the table, and stared at it while the stove heated. Then she folded it twice and tucked it under a jar of preserves. And she sang. Not softly, not carefully. She sang the way a woman sings when she's decided she's not running loud enough to bruise the silence steady enough to hold herself upright. That's when Caleb Rourke heard her. He'd been riding since before dawn, coming south from a cattle job near Pinewood that had ended badly. The foreman shorted him 2 months' pay and dared him to make it a problem. Caleb didn't. He packed his kit, saddled his horse, and left without a word. Not because he was weak, because he'd learned the hard way that anger spent on the wrong people was just energy you couldn't get back. He was tired, hungry, passing through Dust Creek with no plan to stop. Then he heard her voice. It came through the walls of that small house like smoke, not loud, but thick. Present. He pulled his horse to a stop and sat there for a full minute, not understanding why his chest felt tight. He dismounted, walked to the porch, and knocked. The singing stopped like a door slamming shut. Mara opened up with a face that expected trouble. Her eyes went straight to his belt, no gun visible. Then to his boots worn through. Then to his face, and she held there. "What do you want?" she said. "Bread," Caleb said. "I can smell it from the road. I'll pay. 2 cents. "I've got 2 cents. She disappeared inside. Came back with a loaf wrapped in cloth still warm. She held it out at arm's length, the way someone passes a tool functional no invitation. "Thank you," Caleb said. He took it. He didn't leave. Mara's jaw tightened. "Something else." "You were singing," he said. "When I walked up, you stopped." "I wasn't singing." "You were." "Then you heard wrong." She closed the door. Not a slam, just a firm, definitive close that said the conversation was over and had probably gone on too long already. Caleb stood on that porch for another 5 seconds. Then he walked back to his horse, unwrapped the bread, and tore off a piece. Best bread he'd tasted in years. He rode into town thinking he'd resupply and keep moving south. But Dust Creek had a way of tangling people up in its gravity, and Caleb found himself stopping at the general store, then the livery, then the saloon, where a man could sit with one beer and hear everything worth knowing about a place within the hour. That's where he first heard about Mara, the Ellison widow. The bartender, a thick man named Dale with eyebrows like caterpillars, leaned on the counter. "She's still out there, yeah? Surprised she hasn't packed up yet." "Why would she pack up?" Caleb asked. "Why wouldn't she?" "Husband's dead. No children, no family. She's sitting on 40 acres, she can't work herself, and Harlan Briggs has been offering a fair price for months." "Offering?" Caleb repeated. "That's what I said." A man at the end of the bar, sunburned thin, wearing a hat 2 sizes too big, snorted into his drink. "Offering? That's a nice word for it." Dale shot him a look. "Now, Pete..." "What?" Pete turned on his stool. "We all know what Harlan does. He offered the Ramseys fair price too, didn't he? And when they said no, their barn caught fire. Coincidence, right? Big old coincidence that smelled like kerosene. Pete, that's enough. I'm just saying what everybody thinks and nobody says." Dale wiped the counter hard like he was trying to sand down the conversation. "Mara Ellison's got her own problems. None of ours." "That's for damn sure," Pete muttered. "None of ours. That's always been this town's answer." Caleb didn't say anything. He finished his beer, paid, left. But he didn't ride south. He found work the next morning patching fences for a rancher named Hobbs, who needed short-term help and didn't ask questions. The pay was $1 a day, fair enough to justify staying. The work was hard enough to fill the hours. And every morning before he rode out to the Hobbs ranch, Caleb stopped at Mara's porch. The first 3 times she sold him bread without a word beyond the price. The 4th time he said, "You're up early." "I'm always up early." "Before dawn. Bread doesn't bake itself." "No, I suppose it doesn't." She looked at him, really looked for the first time since that first morning. "You're still here." "I'm working for Hobbs." "Hobbs doesn't keep hands longer than a week." "Then I'll be gone in a week." Something shifted behind her eyes. Not warmth, not relief. More like recognition, the expression of someone who'd been counting days for so long that a week felt like a unit of measurement she understood. 2 cents, she said, and handed him the bread. On the 5th morning, Caleb heard the singing again. He was earlier than usual, and he approached the house quietly, not sneaking, but not announcing himself either. The melody slipped through the walls, and this time he stopped to listen without guilt. It was different from the first time. Slower. Sadder. Like a prayer that had given up on being answered, but couldn't stop asking. He waited until it ended. Then he knocked. Mara opened the door with flour on her hands and an expression that said she knew he'd been listening. 2 cents, she said before he could speak. "Mara, it's Mrs. Ellison, and it's 2 cents. He set the coins on the railing. She set the bread in his hands. And for 1 second, just one, their eyes held, and Caleb saw something behind that careful mask: exhaustion. Not the kind sleep could fix. The kind that settles into a person when they've been carrying weight alone for so long, their body has forgotten what light feels like. "Thank you, Mrs. Ellison," he said quietly. She nodded and closed the door. That afternoon, while Caleb was pulling wire at the Hobbs ranch, Pete from the saloon rode up on a mule that looked as tired as he did. "You're the one buying bread from the Ellison place," Pete said. Not a question. Caleb kept pulling wire. "That a crime?" "Not yet. But Harlan Briggs doesn't like people getting comfortable around things he wants to own." Caleb straightened up. "I'm buying bread, not land." Pete chewed on the inside of his cheek. "Harlan doesn't make that distinction. He sees that woman as a problem standing between him and 40 acres. Anybody who makes her feel less alone makes that problem harder to solve. And what exactly is his solution? Pressure, isolation. He's got half this town scared to buy from her. The other half doesn't care enough to try. She's been selling fewer loaves every month. Eventually, she won't be able to afford the property taxes, and Harlan swoops in. That's robbery. That's Dust Creek, friend. Pete tugged his hat brim. Just thought you should know what you're walking into. Caleb watched him ride off. Then he went back to pulling wire, but his jaw was set different now. That evening, instead of heading straight to his rented room above the livery, Caleb walked to the land office. The clerk, a nervous man named Fisher, who wore spectacles that were perpetually sliding down his nose, looked up like he'd seen a ghost. "Help you," Fisher said. "I want to see the tax records for the Ellison property, 40 acres east side of the creek." Fisher's face went through 3 colors. "That's those records are public technically, but then show them to me." Fisher hesitated. Then he pulled a ledger from the shelf, opened it, with the reluctance of a man opening someone else's mail, and turned it toward Caleb. Caleb read the numbers. Then he read them again. "She's current," he said. "Paid through the end of the year." "That's correct." "Then on what grounds is she being asked to leave?" Fisher pushed his spectacles up. "I don't know anything about that." "You're the land clerk, and I file papers. I don't make policy. If you've got questions about Mr. Briggs, I'd suggest you take them up with Mr. Briggs." "Maybe I will." Fisher went pale. "I wouldn't, Mr. Rourke, if that's your name. I wouldn't advise that. Harlan Briggs isn't a man who takes kindly to questions." "I don't take kindly to threats nailed to women's doors." Fisher stared at him. Then he closed the ledger, pulled it back to his side of the desk, and said very quietly, "You didn't hear this from me, but that notice, it wasn't the first one. There've been 3, each one worse than the last, and the sheriff won't touch it because the sheriff owes Harlan money." Caleb stood there processing that. A town where the law was bought, a woman being squeezed out in plain sight, and nobody lifting a finger. "Thank you, Fisher," he said. "Don't thank me, and don't come back here asking questions." Caleb walked out into the evening air. The sky was bruising purple over the ridge, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out high and thin and lonely, the way only a creature that hunts alone sounds. He thought about riding south. Thought about it hard. There was nothing holding him here. Mara Ellison wasn't his responsibility. Dust Creek wasn't his town. Harlan Briggs wasn't his fight. But he kept hearing that melody, the one she sang when she thought nobody was listening. The one that sounded like it was holding the walls up. The next morning, Caleb arrived at Mara's porch earlier than ever. She was already outside scrubbing the railing with a brush and a bucket of water. When she saw him, she didn't stop scrubbing. "You're early," she said. "I know. Bread's not ready yet." "I'll wait." She scrubbed harder. "Most people don't wait." "I'm not most people." Mara stopped. She dropped the brush into the bucket and stood up slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes were red. Not crying red, more like haven't slept red. The kind of red that comes from staring at a ceiling all night and running through every version of tomorrow, and none of them looking any good. "Why do you keep coming back?" she asked. No sharpness this time. Just a question that had been sitting in her chest for days. Caleb didn't rush his answer. He let the question hang there because it deserved that much respect. "Because the bread is good," he said. "And because you sing like somebody who hasn't been heard in a long time." Mara's face didn't change, but something behind it cracked a hairline fracture in the wall she'd spent 4 years building. "I don't sing for people," she said. "I know. That's why it means something." She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she turned and went inside. The door stayed open. Caleb didn't follow her. He sat on the porch step and waited. A few minutes later, she came back with 2 loaves, one wrapped, one on a plate with butter. She set the plate on the step beside him. "Don't read into it," she said. "Wouldn't dream of it." She went back inside, and after a few minutes of silence, the kind of silence that felt different now, lighter, somehow less like a wall, and more like a held breath, Caleb heard it, singing, low and quiet and fragile. But there, He ate the bread slowly. He didn't look at the door. He didn't say a word. And when he left that morning, he set 4 cents on the railing instead of 2. He never mentioned the extra, neither did she. But the next morning, there were 2 plates waiting on the step. Harlan Briggs found out about the cowboy on a Wednesday. His foreman, a square-jawed man named Decker, who did most of Harlan's thinking for him, mentioned it over coffee like it was weather. That widow's got a visitor, some drifter buying bread every morning. Harlan set his cup down. Every morning. Every morning. Name Rourke, Caleb Rourke, working for Hobbs right now. Harlan stared out the window of his office, the largest house in Dust Creek built on money that had more bloodstains than receipts. He was a big man, not tall, wide. The kind of wide that came from decades of taking up space and daring anyone to ask him to move. "I want him gone," Harlan said. "He hasn't done anything. He's giving her a reason to stay. That's enough." Decker waited. "Talk to Hobbs," Harlan said. "Tell him the drifter goes or Hobbs loses his water rights. I own the irrigation easement on his north pasture, and he knows it. And if the drifter doesn't leave..." Harlan picked up his cup again. Took a slow sip. "Then we stop being polite." Caleb lost the Hobbs job on Thursday. Hobbs wouldn't look him in the eye when he said it, just mumbled something about the work being done and handed him a partial week's pay. "Hobbs," Caleb said. "Look at me." Hobbs looked. His face was gray with shame. "Briggs?" Caleb asked. Hobbs didn't answer, but he didn't have to. The silence said everything a man's mouth was too scared to. Caleb pocketed the money. "I'm not leaving town. Son, I'd think real carefully about..." "I've thought about it. I'm not leaving." He rode to Mara's house that afternoon. It was the first time he'd come outside of morning, and she opened the door like she could already tell something was different. "You're not working today," she said. "Got let go." "Hobbs fired you." "Briggs fired me. Hobbs just delivered the message." Mara leaned against the door frame. Her expression didn't change, but her knuckles went white where she gripped the wood. "You should leave," she said. "I know. I mean it. Whatever you think you're doing here, buying bread, being friendly, it's not worth what Harlan will do to you." "What about what he's doing to you?" "That's my problem. Maybe I want it to be mine too." "Why?" Her voice cracked on the word. Not dramatic, not theatrical. Just a single syllable that carried 4 years of isolation and distrust. "Why would you want somebody else's problem when you don't even have a job or a roof that's yours?" Caleb stood at the bottom of her steps and looked up at a woman who had every reason to push him away, and was doing exactly that, not because she wanted to, but because wanting people to stay was the most dangerous thing she'd ever done. "Because I've been wandering for 6 years," he said, "and this is the first porch I've wanted to come back to." Mara's grip on the doorframe didn't loosen. Her chin didn't drop. But her eyes filled in a way that had nothing to do with tears and everything to do with a wall that couldn't hold much longer. "Go find work in another town," she whispered. "Please." "I'll find work here." "There is no work here. Not for someone Harlan's marked." "Then I'll make some." She stared at him. And in that stare was a war hope against history, longing against logic, the desperate human need to believe someone might actually stay fighting against every single time someone hadn't. She closed the door. But she didn't lock it. And that night alone in her kitchen with the stove gone cold and the bread put away, Mara Ellison did something she hadn't done since the day Thomas died. She cried, not from sadness, not from fear, from the terrifying, unbearable possibility that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't done yet. The tears dried before morning. Mara made sure of that. She washed her face with cold water, tied her hair back, and lit the stove like nothing had happened. Because nothing had happened. A man said words on her porch. Words were cheap in Dust Creek, cheaper than bread. She told herself that 3 times before the sun came up. By the 4th time, she almost believed it. Caleb showed up at his usual hour. Mara had the bread ready. She opened the door, set the loaf on the railing, and said, 2 cents, without looking at him. He put the coins down, picked up the bread, didn't leave. I found work, he said. That made her look. Where? Widow Patterson needs her root cellar dug out. Her son was supposed to do it, but he ran off to Denver with a card dealer's daughter. Martha Patterson talks more than she pays. She's paying 50 cents in lunch. That's not enough to live on. It's enough to stay. Mara folded her arms. You're stubborn. I've been told. It's not a compliment. I didn't take it as one. She almost smiled. Almost. The muscles in her face moved toward it, and then pulled back like a horse shying from a fence it wasn't sure it could clear. Harlan won't stop because you're digging root cellars, she said. I don't expect him to. Then what's your plan? Caleb broke off a piece of bread and chewed it slowly. Eat breakfast, dig a cellar, come back tomorrow. That's not a plan. It's what I've got. Mara stared at him the way a person stares at a fire they can't decide whether to feed or smother. Then she went inside and came back with a second plate bread butter and a strip of dried venison she'd been saving. You'll need more than 50 cents worth of energy for Martha Patterson's cellar, she said. That woman's idea of a root cellar is a mine shaft. Caleb took the plate. Their fingers didn't touch, but the distance between them shrank by something that couldn't be measured in inches. Thank you, Mara. She caught the first name. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't correct him. That was Tuesday. By Wednesday, the whole town knew Caleb Rourke hadn't left. Martha Patterson told her neighbor, who told the postmaster, who told Dale at the saloon, who told everyone else. News in Dust Creek didn't travel, it erupted. And by sundown, 2 versions of the story were circulating. The polite version said a drifter was doing odd jobs. The other version, the one people whispered over fences and behind curtains, said the Ellison widow had herself a man. And wasn't that something for a woman who'd barely spoken 10 words to anyone since her husband died? Mara heard the second version from the only person in town who still spoke to her directly. Agnes Wakefield, the seamstress who came by Thursday morning under the pretense of buying bread, but really came to deliver a warning. People are talking, Agnes said, standing on the porch with her hands clasped in front of her like she was at a funeral. People are always talking. This is different. They're saying you and that cowboy, he buys bread, that's all. I know that. But Harlan's wife was at the church meeting last night, and she made a comment about certain women who invite trouble. Everyone knew who she meant. Mara's hands stilled on the cloth she was folding. Edith Briggs hasn't set foot in a church for anything besides gossip since before I was married. That doesn't matter, and you know it. What matters is that Harlan is using this. He's telling people you're not respectable, that a woman like you shouldn't be holding property alone. A woman like me. Agnes winced. His words, not mine. And what do your words say, Agnes? The seamstress looked down, looked back up. Her eyes were wet, and her voice dropped to something barely above a breath. My words say be careful, because I can't help you if this gets worse, and I'm sorry for that, but my shop is on Harlan's land, and my lease is up in 2 months. Mara nodded slowly, not with anger, with the bone-deep understanding of a woman who'd learned exactly what fear looked like when it wore a friend's face. Thank you for telling me, Mara said. Agnes left without buying bread. That evening, Caleb came by after finishing the Patterson cellar. He was covered in dirt and sweat, and he sat on the porch step the way he always did, like a man who'd learned to be comfortable in borrowed spaces. You look like you lost a fight with the earth, Mara said from the doorway. Earth won. But I got the cellar done. She handed him water. He drank half and poured the rest over his head. Agnes Wakefield came by today, Mara said. Caleb waited. The town thinks we're involved. Are we? The question landed like a stone in still water. Mara looked at him hard, searching for the joke, the angle, the thing men always had hiding behind simple questions. She didn't find it. Don't do that, she said quietly. Do what? Ask questions that make me think about answers I can't afford. Caleb set the cup down. Fair enough. He stood, brushed the dirt off his knees. But Mara, whether or not people talk, isn't something you or I can control. What we can control is whether we let their talking decide what we do. That's easy to say when it's not your name they're dragging. You're right, it's not easy, and I'm sorry. He said it without performance. No grand gesture, no reaching for her hand. Just 2 words delivered with the quiet weight of a man who meant them and knew they weren't enough. Mara leaned against the doorframe. Harlan's going to come for you directly. You understand that. He's done circling. I know. And you're still staying. I'm still staying. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were clearer, like something behind them had shifted from survival into decision. Then you should know everything, she said. Come inside. It was the first time she'd invited him past the threshold. The kitchen was small, clean in the way that only a person living alone keeps things clean, everything in its place, because moving things would mean admitting someone else existed in the space. Mara sat at the table and gestured for Caleb to sit across from her. Thomas didn't just die, she said. He was poisoned. Caleb's face changed. Not shock, something harder. Recognition. The fever everyone talks about wasn't a fever. It was arsenic. I found the traces 3 months after he died, white residue in his water canteen. The one he always carried to the fields that border Harlan Briggs's eastern property line. Did you tell anyone? I told the sheriff. And Mara's laugh was a short, broken thing. Sheriff Dawson looked at me, looked at the canteen and said, Mrs. Ellison grief makes people see things that aren't there. Then he walked out. A week later, Harlan made his first offer on the land. Caleb sat very still. The kind of still that happens when a man is rearranging everything he thought he knew. You think Harlan killed your husband. I think Harlan wanted 40 acres of bottomland with creek access, and Thomas was standing on it saying no. Now Thomas is dead, and I'm the one saying no, and Harlan is running out of patience. The canteen, do you still have it? Under the floorboard in the bedroom. I kept it because I knew someday I'd need proof, and I knew nobody would believe me without it. Mara, if what you're saying is true, her eyes flashed. I didn't invite you in here to be doubted. I'm not doubting you. I'm saying if Harlan killed a man for land, then those eviction threats aren't just pressure. You're in real danger. I've been in real danger for 4 years. I just stopped being scared of it. That sentence hung between them like a blade. Caleb looked at this woman, flour still on her apron hands, rough from years of bread and grief. Eyes that had seen the worst thing a human being could see, and decided to keep standing, and he understood something he hadn't fully grasped before. She didn't need saving. She needed someone who wouldn't look away. What do you want to do? He asked. I want to keep my land. I want the truth about Thomas to come out. And I want Harlan Briggs to pay for what he did. That's a war. I know what it is. You can't fight it alone. I've been fighting it alone for 4 years. And how's that working? Mara opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. It's kept me alive. Alive isn't the same as winning. Silence. Then Mara reached across the table, not for his hand, but for the bread knife beside it. She cut a loaf in half, set one piece in front of him, kept the other. If you're going to stay, she said, then eat. And listen. Because I know things about Harlan Briggs that would turn this town inside out. Caleb picked up the bread. And she told him everything. She told him about the Ramsey barn fire, the one Pete had mentioned at the saloon. How the Ramseys had owned 60 acres north of the creek. And how 2 weeks after they refused Harlan's offer, their barn went up at 3 a.m. The family barely got out. They sold the next day. Harlan paid half of what the land was worth. She told him about the Miller well, how Silas Miller's water supply went bad overnight, how his cattle started dying, and how Harlan just happened to have a fresh well on adjacent land and offered to sell access at a price Silas couldn't afford. Silas left town broke. Harlan absorbed the property. She told him about the road contracts, How Harlan had a cousin in the territorial government who steered public contracts through Briggs-owned land, giving Harlan toll rights on routes that should have been free passage. Half the ranchers in the county were paying Harlan for the privilege of driving their cattle to market. "He's built a system," Mara said. "Not just a ranch, a trap, and everyone in Dust Creek is standing in it." "Why hasn't anyone gone to the territorial authorities?" "Because the territorial authorities are 3 days' ride away, and Harlan's cousin makes sure complaints get lost. The one man who did try a school teacher named Greer got beaten so badly on the road outside town that he couldn't walk for 6 months. Nobody saw anything. Nobody ever sees anything." "What about the federal marshal?" "The nearest marshal is in Carson City. That's a week's ride. And what evidence would you bring? A canteen with residue, a list of coincidences. Harlan's too smart to leave fingerprints." Caleb leaned back. "Then we need to make him leave fingerprints." Mara studied him. "That's dangerous talk." "Everything about this is dangerous. At least this is dangerous with a direction." "And what direction is that?" "Harlan wants your land. He's going to keep pushing until he gets it, or until the cost of pushing becomes higher than the land is worth. Right now there's no cost. The sheriff's bought. The town's scared. You're alone." He paused. "But you're not alone anymore. One cowboy with no gun and no job isn't exactly an army. Pete at the saloon, he knows the truth. He said it right to my face. Pete's a drunk. Pete's angry. There's a difference. And angry men with nothing to lose are the most dangerous people in any fight. Pete has plenty to lose. His room above the saloon is paid for by Dale, and Dale won't cross Harlan. Then we find the people who've already lost everything. The Ramseys, the Millers, Silas, where did he go? Silver Junction last I heard, working a freight line. And the Ramseys. Their daughter is in Pine Bluff, married a carpenter. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, what about the school teacher Greer? Mara's face shifted. Something complicated moved behind her eyes. Greer is still here. He lives in a room behind the church. He can't teach anymore, his hands shake too badly to write, but his mind is sharp. Sharper than anyone gives him credit for. Would he talk? He'd do more than talk. He's been keeping records, dates, names, transactions, everything Harlan's done for the past decade. He showed them to me once about a year ago. Said he was building a case for the day someone finally had the courage to take it somewhere. Caleb felt something click into place, the way a key turns in a lock you've been pushing against for hours. "I need to talk to Greer," he said. "Not yet." Mara's voice was firm. "Harlan's watching you. If you start visiting the one man in town who's known to have a grudge, Harlan will know exactly what's happening." "Then how?" "Through me. I'll go to the church. A widow visiting a church is invisible. I'll talk to Greer and bring back what he has." "That puts you at risk." "I'm already at risk. I've been at risk since the day I found that residue in Thomas's canteen. At least now the risk has a purpose." Caleb looked at her across that table, a woman who'd been sold the story that she was powerless, that she was alone, that silence was safety, and who was in this small kitchen in this quiet moment, choosing to stop believing it. "When?" he asked. "Sunday, after services. I'll stay behind to pray. Nobody questions a widow who prays. And if Harlan has someone watching the church, then I'll pray louder." Caleb almost laughed. It caught in his throat and came out as something between a cough and a sound he hadn't made in years. Genuine amusement, born from surprise. Mara noticed. Her mouth twitched. "Was that a laugh?" "It's been a while. I'm out of practice." "You and me both." They sat there in her kitchen. Two people who'd forgotten how to laugh, both recognizing it in each other, like a language they'd stopped speaking and suddenly remembered. Then Mara stood. The moment passed. The walls went back up, but not all the way. Not like before. "You should go," she said. "You've been here too long. Tongues will wag. Let them wag. You can afford to say that. I can't." She walked to the door and held it open. "Tomorrow morning. 2 cents. Same as always." Same as always, Caleb agreed. He walked past her close enough to catch the smell of bread and wood smoke that lived in her clothes like a second skin. On the porch he stopped. Mara. Mrs. Ellison. Mara. He turned. Thank you for telling me about Thomas. Her grip on the door tightened. Don't make me regret it. I won't. She held his gaze for one beat. 2. Then, good night, Caleb. It was the first time she'd used his name. He walked into the dark with that sound in his ears, and for the first time in 6 years of drifting, the road under his feet didn't pull him forward. Something behind him pulled harder. 2 miles away, in the largest house in Dust Creek, Harlan Briggs sat at his desk reading a letter from his cousin in the territorial office. The letter was short, 3 sentences. But the third one made Harlan set down his whiskey and stare at the wall for a long time. Federal inspection team arriving June 15th. Territorial land records under review. Destroy what needs destroying. June 15th was 3 weeks away. Harlan opened his desk drawer. Inside was a deed forged backdated bearing Thomas Ellison's signature in ink that was 2 years newer than the date claimed. It was the document Harlan planned to use to prove Thomas had sold the land before he died. It was the foundation of everything. And now federal inspectors were coming to look at exactly the kind of records that would expose it. Harlan closed the drawer, called for Decker. Change of plans, he said when the foreman appeared. The Ellison property. I need it settled before June 15th, not pressured. Settled. Signed over one way or another. And the Cowboy. Harlan's jaw worked. Whatever it takes, but keep it clean enough that nobody can point fingers. Decker nodded and left. Harlan poured another whiskey and drank it in one swallow. The glass hit the desk hard enough to crack the base, and he didn't notice. 3 weeks. That was all the time in the world, and nowhere near enough. And in her kitchen, alone with the stove cooling and the bread put away. Mara Ellison stood at the window looking out at nothing. She pressed her hand flat against the glass, and she began very quietly to sing. Sunday came slower than any day Mara could remember. She dressed for church the way she always did, plain cotton hair pinned tight, no jewelry except Thomas's ring on a chain around her neck, tucked beneath the fabric where nobody could see it and nobody could ask. She walked the half-mile into town with her Bible under her arm and her pulse hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. The church was full. It was always full. Not because Dust Creek was devout, but because Harlan Briggs sat in the front pew every Sunday, and attendance was the simplest way to stay on his good side. Mara slipped into the back row. She kept her eyes forward. She sang the hymns without hearing them. And when the service ended and the congregation filed out into the daylight, she stayed. She knelt. She folded her hands, and she waited until the building emptied. It took 12 minutes. She counted. Then she stood and walked to the small door behind the pulpit that led to the back rooms of the church. The hallway was narrow and smelled like damp wool and candle wax. At the end of it, behind a door that didn't close properly, sat Elijah Greer. He was thinner than she remembered. The beating had taken 60 pounds off a frame that didn't have 60 pounds to spare. His hands rested on the arms of a wooden chair, and they trembled a constant fine vibration, like a string plucked and never allowed to stop. But his eyes were steady, clear. The eyes of a man whose body had been broken, but whose mind had responded by getting sharper. Mara Ellison, Greer said. It's been a while. I need your records, Elijah. No preamble, no small talk. Greer respected that. He tilted his head. What changed? Federal inspectors are coming. 3 weeks. Greer's hands stopped trembling. Just for a second, a flash of stillness that looked almost like hope. How do you know that? I don't. Someone told me. Someone I trust. The Cowboy. Mara didn't confirm or deny. Greer read the answer anyway. People talk, he said. Even to me. Especially to me, actually. Most folks treat a crippled man like furniture. They say things in front of me they'd never say to each other. He paused. Decker was in here 2 days ago. sat in the pew right outside this wall, and told another one of Harlan's men that the boss needed the Ellison matter resolved before mid-June. His exact words were, "resolved." I know what resolved means. Do you? 'Cause it doesn't mean another note on your door, Mara. It means something final. Mara sat down on the only other chair in the room. Then help me make sure Harlan is the one who gets something final. Greer studied her. Then he reached beneath his chair, slowly, painfully, and pulled out a leather satchel that had been strapped to the underside of the seat with twine. 14 months of work, he said, setting it on his lap. Every land transaction Harlan Briggs has made in this county. The Ramsey fire, I have a signed statement from their daughter confirming the timeline. The Miller well poisoning, I found the man Harlan paid to dump lye into it. He's in Silver Junction now, dying of consumption and willing to talk because he's more afraid of God than he is of Harlan. The road contracts. I have copies of the territorial filings with Harlan's cousin's name on every single one. And Thomas? Greer's face softened. I have a letter, written by Thomas himself, dated 3 weeks before he died. Mara's breath caught. What? He brought it to me. Came to the schoolhouse after hours. Said he'd refused Harlan's offer for the 4th time, and he was starting to feel watched. He wanted someone to know someone outside the family in case something happened to him. What does the letter say? It says that Harlan Briggs threatened him directly, face to face. Told him that men who stood in the way of progress in Dust Creek had a habit of meeting unfortunate ends. Thomas wrote it down word for word the night it happened. He signed it. I witnessed it. Mara pressed her hand against her mouth. 4 years. 4 years of carrying the weight of what she suspected alone with nothing but a canteen and a dead man's silence for proof. And this whole time, Thomas had left a trail. He'd seen it coming. He'd tried to protect her the only way he could. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered. Greer looked at his shaking hands. Because 2 weeks after Thomas died, they broke my fingers. Every one of them. Decker held me down, and Harlan's other man, a hired hand named Sykes, did it with a farrier's hammer. Then they told me that if I ever spoke to you or to anyone about anything related to Thomas Ellison, they'd finish what they started. Elijah, I was afraid. He said it plainly. No shame left, just fact. For a long time I was afraid. And by the time I stopped being afraid, you'd sealed yourself inside that house and stopped talking to everyone. I didn't know how to reach you without making things worse. And now there's a federal inspection coming. Now there's a cowboy who apparently isn't going anywhere. And now I'm an old man with ruined hands who's had 14 months to decide that dying quietly is worse than dying loud. Mara reached out and placed her hand over his trembling ones. His fingers stilled under her touch, not completely, but enough. You're not dying, she said. We're all dying, Mara. The question is whether we do something useful first. She took the satchel. It was heavier than it looked, not in weight, but in consequence. She held it against her chest the way she'd once held Thomas's coat after they took his body away. I need to get this to the federal inspectors, she said. You need to get it out of Dust Creek first. If Harlan finds out these records exist, he'll burn them along with whoever's holding them. Then I won't let him find out. He has eyes everywhere. Not in my kitchen. Greer almost smiled. You always were the stubbornest woman in this town. Second stubbornest. Martha Patterson once argued with a mule for 2 hours, and won. This time Greer did smile, a real one, cracked and pained, but real. Go, before someone notices you've been praying for 40 minutes. Mara tucked the satchel under her shawl. She stood. At the door she turned back. Elijah, thank you. For keeping Thomas's words alive when I couldn't. Greer nodded. His hands were shaking again, but his eyes were still steady. Tell your cowboy that if he's half the man Thomas was, you'll be all right. Mara walked out of the church, into daylight that felt different now. Brighter. Harder. The kind of light that exposes things. She took the long way home through the back paths behind the livery, along the creek bed where the cottonwoods grew thick enough to hide a person's shape. The satchel pressed against her ribs with every step. She could feel Thomas's letter inside it, folded and sealed, a voice reaching across 4 years of death, to say, I knew. I tried to warn you. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. Caleb was waiting on her porch. She walked past him without speaking, went inside and set the satchel on the table. Then she turned to face him. Greer had everything, she said. Signed statements, transaction records, witness accounts. She paused. And a letter from Thomas. Caleb read her face. What kind of letter? The kind a man writes when he knows someone's going to kill him. She told Caleb what Greer had said about the letter, about the threat, about the beating, about the 14 months of secret work. She told him about the witness in Silver Junction, about the Ramsey daughter's statement about Harlan's cousin, and the road contracts. She told him all of it without stopping, without wavering, without her voice cracking once. She'd spent 4 years learning how to hold herself together, and right now that skill was the only thing keeping her upright. When she finished, Caleb sat in silence for a long time. This changes everything, he finally said. This changes nothing unless we get it to the right people. The federal inspectors. They'll be here in 3 weeks. We need to get this evidence to them before Harlan knows it exists. Or we take it to them first. Ride to Carson City. Put it directly in a marshal's hands. That's a week's ride. Harlan would notice I was gone by the second day. And if he searches this house while I'm away, then I go. You stay. Keep selling bread. Keep things normal. Mara shook her head. You don't know what you're carrying. You don't know the people. You can't explain the connections, who sold what, when, why it matters. A stranger walking into a marshal's office with a satchel of papers isn't evidence, it's a nuisance. Then we both go, and leave the house unprotected. Harlan would have it torched before we hit the county line. They were trapped. Both of them could see it. Every path out required leaving something vulnerable behind. There's another way, Mara said slowly. We don't go to them. We bring them to us. How? Fisher, the land clerk. He's scared of Harlan, but he's more scared of federal investigators finding out he's been filing fraudulent documents under pressure. If we tell Fisher that we have proof Harlan's been forging deeds, proof that will come out when the inspectors arrive, he'll have a choice: help us now and be a witness, or wait and be a co-conspirator. That's a hell of a gamble. Fisher's a coward. Cowards always choose the side that scares them less. Right now Harlan scares him. We need to make the federal government scare him more. Caleb leaned forward. You've thought about this. For 4 years, I just didn't have the ammunition until today. When? Tomorrow. You go to Fisher. I can't if I show up at the land office. Harlan hears about it within the hour. But a cowboy looking for work, asking about property records, maybe inquiring about available land that's invisible. And once I'm in there, you tell Fisher exactly 3 things. 1, federal inspectors are coming June 15th. 2, we have Thomas Ellison's letter documenting Harlan's direct threat. 3, we have the forged deed. Caleb blinked. We have the forged deed. No, but Fisher doesn't know that. And the moment you say it, watch his face. If he goes white, it means he filed it. If he goes white and starts sweating, it means he knows exactly where it is and how fast it could end his career. Mara, this is manipulation. Yes, Thomas would have called it chess. I call it surviving. Caleb looked at her with something new in his expression. Not just respect, not just admiration, but the startled recognition of a man realizing he'd been underestimating someone from the very first moment. Tomorrow, he said. Early, before the office opens to the public. Fisher gets there at 7 to sort mail. He handles post for the land office as a side duty. Catch him alone. And if he panics and goes straight to Harlan, he won't, because you'll also tell him one more thing. What's that? That if he goes to Harlan, the inspectors will receive his name first, not Harlan's, his. Caleb exhaled. You could have been a general. I was a farmer's wife. It's the same thing with less credit. He stood. The satchel sat between them on the table, a bomb made of paper and patience. Caleb reached for it, then stopped. Looked at Mara. Where do we keep this? Not here. Harlan might search the house. Not at your room, too obvious. She thought for a moment. Martha Patterson's root cellar. The one I just dug. It's fresh earth. Nobody's been in it. Martha stores nothing down there yet. And Martha Patterson is the one person in this town Harlan Briggs has never bothered because sharp enough to cut glass. Nobody goes near her unless they have to. You want me to bury evidence in a widow's cellar? I want you to put a satchel in a dry hole and cover it with a board. Martha doesn't need to know. Nobody needs to know except us. Caleb picked up the satchel, held it, felt the weight of a dead man's last words pressing through the leather. I'll do it tonight, he said. After dark, use the creek path. He moved toward the door, stopped. Mara. She looked up. Thomas was smart. Writing that letter, finding Greer. He saw what was coming, and he tried to leave you a weapon. Mara's jaw tightened. He left me alone. That's what he did. He saw what was coming, and he didn't run. He didn't take me and leave. He stayed, and he died, and he left me alone with a canteen and a letter I didn't even know about. He stayed because the land was yours. Both of yours. The land is dirt. He was my husband. The words cracked open and everything behind them spilled out. 4 years of grief that had been dressed up as strength. 4 years of anger that had been disguised as silence. 4 years of love that had nowhere left to go and had turned inward like a blade. Caleb didn't try to fix it. Didn't offer comfort. Didn't say I understand because he didn't, and they both knew it. He just stood there, present, unhelpable but unmoving. After a full minute, Mara wiped her face with the back of her hand. One motion, efficient, done. Go, she said, before the light's completely gone. He went. The creek path was dark and quiet. Caleb carried the satchel inside his coat held tight against his body. He moved carefully, staying below the bank, where the shadows pooled thickest. Martha Patterson's property was a 20-minute walk north. He'd dug her cellar himself. He knew every inch of it. He was halfway there when he heard footsteps behind him. He stopped. Listened. The footsteps stopped half a second too late, the way a follower does when they realize they've been heard. Caleb didn't turn around. He knelt by the creek like a man filling a canteen. Slowly, calmly. Then he palmed a stone from the bank river smooth heavy enough to do damage and slipped it into his left hand. The footsteps started again. Closer. That's far enough, Caleb said without turning. Silence. Then a voice, young, nervous, trying to sound tough. Mr. Briggs wants to see you. Tell Mr. Briggs I'm busy. He said you'd say that. He said to tell you it's not a request. Caleb stood, turned. The man behind him was barely 21 of Harlan's hands, the kind of kid hired for muscle and kept stupid with whiskey and small wages. He had a pistol on his hip, but his hand was nowhere near it. Scared. Following orders he didn't fully understand. What's your name? Caleb asked. The kid hesitated. Jennings. Jennings, you're following me in the dark on a creek path. You know how that looks. I got my orders. Your orders are going to get you hurt. Not by me, by this creek bank. It's slippery as hell, and you're wearing smooth-soled boots. Caleb said it like advice, not a threat. Go back. Tell Harlan I'll be in town tomorrow. He can talk to me then. He wants to talk now. And I want a steak dinner in new boots. We're both disappointed. Jennings shifted his weight. The scared look deepened. He'll be angry. He's already angry. That's got nothing to do with you or me. Go home, Jennings. The kid stood there for 10 more seconds. Then he turned and walked back the way he came, his footsteps fading into the dark until the creek was the only sound left. Caleb waited 5 full minutes. Then he changed his route, doubled back, cut west through the brush, and approached Martha Patterson's property from the far side. He found the cellar, lifted the board, and placed the satchel inside. Covered it with the burlap sacking Martha had left folded near the entrance. Replaced the board. He stood over it for a moment. A dead man's letter. A broken man's records. A widow's last chance. All buried in a hole a cowboy dug for 50 cents and lunch. He walked back to town under stars. He didn't look at, with a stone still in his left hand, and a name in his mouth he hadn't said aloud yet, but couldn't stop thinking. Mara. The woman who sang to fill silence and fought like she'd been born knowing this day would come. When he reached his room above the livery, he locked the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and replayed every word she'd said that night. The strategy, the anger, the grief. He left me alone. That's what he did. And Caleb made a decision, not with ceremony, not with a speech to an empty room, but with the quiet certainty of a man who'd been drifting for 6 years and had just found the current he was willing to fight. He wasn't leaving Dust Creek. Not tomorrow. Not when the inspectors came. Not after. He was staying until the singing didn't stop anymore. Fisher was already inside the land office when Caleb arrived at 10 minutes to 7. The door was unlocked, a habit of a man who never expected visitors this early. Caleb pushed it open and stepped inside without knocking. Fisher looked up from a stack of mail, and every drop of color left his face. "We're not open," Fisher said. "I know." Caleb closed the door behind him. "That's why I'm here now. If this is about property listings, you can come back at Federal Inspection Team, June 15th. Land records under review." Caleb said each phrase like he was laying cards on a table. "You already knew that." Fisher's hands went still on the mail. His mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Nothing came out. "I'll take that as a yes," Caleb said. "Who told you?" "Doesn't matter who told me. What matters is what those inspectors are going to find when they start looking through your files. Specifically the deed transfer for the Ellison property. The one dated 6 months before Thomas Ellison died. The one Thomas Ellison never signed." Fisher's spectacles slid down his nose. He didn't push them back. His hands were shaking too badly. I don't know what you're talking about." "Fisher, look at me." Caleb leaned forward, not threatening. Worse than threatening, calm. "You filed that deed. Your handwriting is on the registry entry. When the inspectors pull it, they won't see Harlan's name first. They'll see yours." "He made me do it." The words tumbled out like water through a cracked dam. "He came in here with Decker and told me if I didn't file it, he'd ruin me. I've got a wife, I've got children in Cheyenne. I'm not here to punish you." Fisher stopped babbling, stared. "I'm here to give you a way out," Caleb said. "The inspectors are coming regardless. Harlan knows it. He's trying to clean up before they arrive. That means he's going to need a scapegoat, and you're the easiest one to sacrifice. The man who filed the paperwork. The man whose name is on the records. He broke a schoolteacher's fingers with a farrier's hammer. You think he'll hesitate to let you take the fall for a forged deed?" Fisher's face collapsed. Not slowly, all at once, like a building whose supports had been quietly rotting for years, and finally gave way. He sat down hard, missed the chair, and caught himself on the desk. "What do you want?" he whispered. "I want you to write a statement. Everything you know. Every document Harlan forced you to file. Every threat he made. Dates, names, details. You write it, you sign it, and when the inspectors come, you hand it to them yourself. Willingly. As a cooperating witness, not a co-conspirator. He'll kill me. He'll try to destroy you either way. This way you have federal protection. The other way you have nothing." Fisher pulled his spectacles off and pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. He stayed like that for a long time. When he dropped his hands, his eyes were red, and his jaw was set, not with courage exactly, but with the grim resolve of a man who's been shown the math and can't argue with it. "How long do I have?" "I need it by Wednesday." 3 days. "Can you do it?" Fisher reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. His hands were still shaking, but he picked up his pen. "Close the door on your way out," he said. Caleb left the land office with his blood running faster than it had in years. He walked straight to Mara's house, not his usual casual morning approach, but direct, purposeful, the walk of a man carrying news that couldn't wait. Mara saw him coming through the window. She had the door open before he reached the steps. "Fisher," she said. "He's writing it. Full statement. Everything." Mara gripped the door frame. Her knuckles went white, then slowly released. He agreed. He didn't have a choice. He already knew the inspectors were coming. He'd been sitting in that office waiting for the floor to open up and swallow him. Did he mention the deed? He practically confessed before I finished the sentence. Mara, he's terrified. He's been carrying this for years. He wanted someone to push him. She stepped back from the door, not to invite him in to steady herself. Then Harlan's foundation is cracking. It's worse than cracking. If Fisher's statement matches Greer's records and Thomas's letter, the inspectors won't just investigate. They'll arrest. Mara pressed both palms flat on the table. She breathed in, breathed out. Then she looked at Caleb with an expression he hadn't seen before. Not the guarded wariness, not the hard determination, but something raw and fragile underneath both. "I've been waiting 4 years for this," she said. "And now that it's happening, I'm terrified." Of what? Of hoping. Because hope is the cruelest thing there is when you've already lost everything once. Caleb stepped inside, stood across the table from her. "You haven't lost everything. You've got a house 40 acres, a dead man's letter, a school teacher's records, a land clerk's confession, and a cowboy who makes terrible life decisions." Her mouth twitched. Not a smile, the ghost of one. The kind that shows up when the body wants to laugh and the heart isn't sure it's allowed. "Wednesday," she said. "We get Fisher's statement. Then what? Then we wait for the inspectors. Keep everything buried at Martha's until they arrive. Stay normal. Sell bread. Don't give Harlan any reason to—" A knock on the door. Hard. 3 sharp raps. They both froze. "Mara Ellison." The voice was deep, measured, and thick with practiced authority. "It's Sheriff Dawson. Open up." Mara's eyes locked on Caleb's. In that single look past an entire conversation, stay, go hide, don't move. It's too late for any of that. "Sit down," she whispered. "You're having breakfast, that's all." She straightened her apron, walked to the door, and opened it. Sheriff Dawson was a tall man, made smaller by the choices he'd made. He wore the star on his chest like a debt he couldn't repay, which in a sense it was. Behind him stood Decker Harlan's foreman, arms crossed, face empty. "Sheriff," Mara said, "it's early for a visit." "Official business, Mrs. Ellison. We've received a complaint." "From whom?" "That's not relevant. There's been a report of stolen property being kept on your premises." "Stolen property? On my premises?" Mara repeated it the way a woman repeats something absurd flatly, with just enough contempt to make the speaker feel the weight of his own lie. "I'll need to search the house." "You'll need a warrant." Dawson shifted his weight. He hadn't expected that. Most people in Dust Creek didn't know the law well enough to invoke it, and those who did were smart enough not to. "Mrs. Ellison, we can do this easy, or show me the warrant, Sheriff, or walk off my porch." Decker stepped forward. "Now listen here. Decker, you're not the law. You're not anything except a man standing on my property without invitation. Step back or I'll document your trespassing along with the sheriff's failure to produce a warrant, and I'll send both accounts to the territorial judge in Carson City. His name is Whitfield. You know the name." Decker's jaw tightened. He looked at Dawson. Dawson looked at the ground. "We'll be back," Dawson said. "With paper. Then I'll be here, with coffee, and a witness." Mara glanced back toward the kitchen where Caleb sat visible at the table. Dawson clocked him. His expression soured further. "Good morning, gentlemen," Mara said and closed the door. She stood with her back against it, eyes closed, breathing through her nose. When she opened them, her hands were shaking. "How long before they come back with a warrant?" Caleb asked. "They won't. A warrant requires a judge, and the nearest judge is in Carson City." Dawson was bluffing. Harlan sent him to fish. See if I'd panic. Let them in. Let them find something. "The satchel isn't here." "Harlan doesn't know that. He's guessing. Testing." She pushed off the door and sat down across from Caleb. "But now he knows you're here. Inside my house, at my table." "Good." "How is that good?" "Because it means he's not thinking about Fisher. He's not thinking about Greer. He's thinking about you and me, and as long as he's looking in this direction, the pieces we've already moved are safe." Mara considered this. You're using us as a distraction. I'm saying if Harlan wants to focus on a cowboy eating bread, let him. The real fight is happening in places he's not watching. Yet, Caleb agreed. That afternoon, Mara did something she hadn't done in over a year. She walked into town. Not to buy supplies, not to sell bread. She walked into town to be seen. She went to the general store. She bought flour, salt, and a tin of baking powder. She paid full price, counted the coins slowly, and said good morning to every person who made eye contact. Most looked away. A few nodded. One woman, the postmaster's wife, actually said hello. Back then, immediately glanced around to see if anyone had noticed. Mara noticed. She noticed all of it. The flinching, the averted eyes, the way people physically moved aside when she walked through. She'd spent 4 years being invisible, and now she was deliberately stepping back into the light, and the town didn't know what to do with her. On her way home, she stopped at Pete's usual spot outside the saloon. Pete! He squinted up from his chair. Well, look who's walking among the living. I need a favor. From me, lady, I can barely do myself favors. I need you to ride to Silver Junction. Find Silas Miller. Pete's squint deepened. Silas Miller, the one Harlan ran off. What do you want with Silas? I want him to come home. He won't come home. He's got nothing left here. He's got a testimony, and he's got rage. Tell him the federal government is coming to Dust Creek to look at land records. Tell him that if he wants his name cleared and his losses documented, he needs to be here before June 15th. Pete stared at her for a long time. Something shifted behind his bloodshot eyes. Not sobriety, but focus. The same look a hunting dog gets when it picks up a scent after months of sleeping by the fire. You're really doing this, he said. You're going after Harlan. I'm protecting what's mine. If Harlan gets caught in the process, that's his problem. Pete stood up, slowly. His knees cracked and his back protested, but he stood all the way straight and looked Mara in the eye with more clarity than she'd seen from him in years. Silver Junction is 2 days' ride. Can you make it in 1.5? I can if I stop drinking tonight. He paused. Which is going to be a real unpleasant experience for everyone involved. I'll give you $3 for travel expenses. Keep your money. I've been wanting to do something useful since before I can remember. Consider this my contribution to the cause. He walked into the saloon. Walked back out 2 minutes later with a bedroll and a canteen. Pete, Mara said as he headed toward the livery. He turned. Be careful. Careful's for people with something to lose. I'll be back with Silas, or I won't be back at all. He left. Mara stood there for a moment watching him go, feeling something she couldn't quite name expanding in her chest. It wasn't hope. She still didn't trust hope. It was something older. The recognition that she wasn't the only person in Dust Creek who'd been waiting for this fight. She'd just been the one too proud and too hurt to start it. That evening, Caleb came to the house. Mara told him about Pete, about the trip to Silver Junction, about walking through town. He listened without interrupting. You're building an army, he said. I'm gathering witnesses. Same thing in a courtroom. This isn't going to be a courtroom, Caleb. This is going to be Harlan Briggs cornered, and a cornered animal is the most dangerous thing there is. We need to be ready for what he does when he realizes the trap is closing. What do you think he'll do? Mara was quiet for a moment. The night Thomas's fever got bad, the real bad, the kind where I knew he grabbed my hand and said, "Don't let him take the land, Mara, because the land's the proof." I didn't understand what he meant. I thought it was the fever talking. And now I think Thomas knew something was buried on this property. Something Harlan needs. Not the land itself, something on it. Under it. Something worth killing for, and worth stealing 40 acres to make sure nobody ever finds. Caleb went still. Do you have any idea what? Thomas was digging a new well the month before he died. East corner of the property, right along the border with Harlan's land. He told me he was looking for water. But he came home one evening with dirt under his nails up to his elbows, and a look on his face I'd never seen before. Scared. Excited. like he'd found something that changed everything. "Did he tell you what?" I asked. He said, "Not yet. Let me be sure first." That was a Tuesday. By Saturday he was dead. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. "We need to look at that well," Caleb said. "Not yet. Harlan's watching the property. If we start digging, he'll know." "Then when?" "After the inspectors arrive, when Harlan's too busy defending himself to notice what we're doing on our own land. And if he figures out what Thomas found before then—" Mara's expression hardened. "Then we have a problem." Wednesday came. Caleb went to the land office at 7 sharp. Fisher was waiting. He looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days because he hadn't. On the desk sat a sealed envelope thick with pages. "Everything," Fisher said. "Every deed I filed under duress. Every forged signature. Dates, descriptions, witnesses where I had them. I named Decker. I named Harlan. I named Harlan's cousin at the territorial office." He pushed the envelope across the desk. "And I need you to know something." "What?" "There's a second set of books. Harlan keeps them in a safe at his house. The official records here, they're the clean versions. The real records, the ones showing actual sale prices, actual dates, actual signatures or lack thereof, are in that safe. If the inspectors get those books, it's not just a land fraud case. It's a criminal conspiracy spanning 8 years. Can you testify to the safe's existence?" "I've seen it. Harlan showed it to me once, a threat, basically. Showed me how everything was documented, said if I ever talked, the books would show I was complicit. But the books also show his own handwriting on every entry. He was too arrogant to think anyone would ever get that far." Caleb took the envelope. "You've done the right thing, Fisher." Fisher laughed, a hollow, exhausted sound. "The right thing would have been saying no 4 years ago. This is the desperate thing. I just hope it's enough." "It will be. Your friend, the Ellison woman, is she safe? She's the safest person in this town. She's the one nobody saw coming." Fisher nodded slowly. "My wife. My children. If Harlan finds out before the inspectors arrive, send them to Cheyenne, tonight. Tell your wife it's a visit. Tell her you'll explain later. She'll know something's wrong. Better she's wrong in Cheyenne than right in Dust Creek." Fisher pulled his spectacles off, wiped them, put them back on. "God help us all." Caleb left with the envelope inside his coat, walked 2 blocks east, cut through the alley behind the feed store, and headed for Martha Patterson's cellar. He added Fisher's statement to the satchel, reburied everything, and walked back to town like a man without a care in the world. That night, Decker knocked on the door of Caleb's room above the livery. 3 heavy knocks. Patient. Unhurried. Caleb opened it. Decker stood in the hallway, hat in hand, a tight smile on his face that didn't reach anywhere close to his eyes. "Mr. Rourke, Mr. Briggs requests the pleasure of your company. Tomorrow morning. Breakfast at the main house." "A breakfast invitation?" "Mr. Briggs is a hospitable man. Mr. Briggs sent his sheriff to search a widow's home without a warrant 3 days ago. Hospitable isn't the word I'd use." Decker's smile didn't waver. 8 o'clock. The main house. I'd encourage you to attend. And if I decline, then Mr. Briggs will be disappointed. And Mr. Briggs doesn't handle disappointment well." They looked at each other across the threshold, 2 men measuring weight, calculating speed, reading the mathematics of violence. 8 o'clock, Caleb said. "I'll be there." Decker tipped his hat and left. Caleb closed the door. He sat on the bed. He thought about Mara, about Thomas, about a dead man's well on the east corner of 40 acres, and a letter that had been waiting 4 years to be heard. Then he pulled off his boots, lay back, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow he'd walk into the house of the man who killed Thomas Ellison, and sit across from him and eat his food and look him in the eye. And Harlan Briggs would have no idea that the ground beneath him was already gone. Caleb arrived at Harlan Briggs's front door at 8 o'clock sharp. Decker opened it without a word and led him through a hallway that smelled like leather and old money. The dining room was at the back of the house. Harlan sat at the head of a table set for 2 eggs, bacon biscuits, coffee in a porcelain pot that probably cost more than everything Caleb owned combined. "Mr. Rourke." Harlan gestured to the empty chair. Sit. Caleb sat. He didn't touch the food. Harlan poured coffee for both of them, took a slow sip, set the cup down with the deliberate precision of a man who controlled everything, including the speed at which he drank. "I'll be direct," Harlan said. "You're a problem I didn't anticipate. I get that a lot. I'm sure you do. Drifters usually cause problems. It's in their nature, no roots, no accountability, no reason to care about the consequences of their actions." Harlan cut a piece of bacon and chewed it thoughtfully. "But you're different. You've stayed. You've taken an interest in a woman who has nothing to offer. And you've been asking questions around town that suggest you're either very curious or very stupid. Can't it be both?" Harlan didn't smile. "I'm going to make you an offer, Mr. Rourke. A generous one. $500. Cash. Today. You take it, you ride south, and you don't come back. $500 is more than most men see in a year. You could start over anywhere." "That's generous." "It is." "And if I say no?" Harlan leaned back. "Then I'll be less generous tomorrow." Caleb picked up his coffee, drank, set it down. "Mr. Briggs, let me ask you something. How much did you offer Thomas Ellison before he died?" The room went cold, not temperature atmosphere. Harlan's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down slowly. "Thomas Ellison died of a fever. Thomas Ellison died of arsenic. And you know that because you're the one who put it in his canteen." Harlan's eyes didn't blink, didn't widen, didn't do anything a normal man's eyes would do when accused of murder. They just went flat the way a snake's eyes go flat before it strikes. "That's a dangerous accusation." "It's not an accusation. It's a fact. And in about 2 weeks, federal inspectors are going to arrive in this town and hear that fact from multiple sources backed by documentation you didn't know existed." Harlan's jaw worked. Once. Twice. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" "Your land clerk is writing a full confession as we speak. Your forged deed for the Ellison property, the one Fisher filed under duress, is going to be the first document they examine. And Thomas Ellison wrote a letter 3 weeks before his death describing your direct threat to his life. That letter has been preserved, witnessed, sealed." Silence. Then Harlan laughed. It was the wrong kind of laugh. Not amusement, not dismissal. The desperate guttural laugh of a man who spent decades believing he was untouchable and is hearing the first crack in the armor. "Fisher wouldn't dare," Harlan said. "Fisher already has. His family left for Cheyenne 2 days ago. He's got nothing left to threaten." Harlan pushed his plate away. The pretense of a civilized breakfast evaporated. What sat across from Caleb now was the real man, stripped of manners, stripped of strategy, running on raw power and fury. "You think papers and letters will bring me down? I built this town. I own the sheriff. I own the roads. I own the water. Every man in Dust Creek eats because I allow it. And every man in Dust Creek is afraid because you demand it. That's not ownership, Briggs. That's a cage. And cages break." Harlan stood. His chair scraped back hard. "Get out of my house." Caleb stood too, slowly. "Thank you for breakfast. Decker will show you out." "I know the way." Caleb walked to the door. He could feel Decker behind him close, tense, waiting for a signal. It didn't come. He made it to the porch, made it to the road, kept walking without looking back. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline, from the knowledge that he'd just kicked a hornet's nest and the swarm was coming. He went straight to Mara's house. She was at the stove. She saw his face and turned off the fire. "What happened?" "He offered me $500 to leave. And I told him about the letter, about Fisher, about the inspectors." Mara went white. "You told him." "He needed to know the ground was gone. A cornered man makes mistakes, Mara, and Harlan is about to make the biggest one of his life. Or the most violent one. That's why we need to move faster. The Satchel Fisher's statement. Thomas's letter, we can't wait for the inspectors anymore. Harlan will destroy everything he can reach before June 15th. We need to ride to Carson City. Now. Today." Both of us. Both of us. Greer watches the cellar. Pete's bringing Silas back from Silver Junction. Fisher's statement is already signed. We take everything to the federal marshal, and we don't come back until we have warrants. Mara gripped the edge of the stove. If we leave, Harlan burns the house. If we stay, Harlan burns more than the house. She stared at him. He watched her calculate the way she always did, measuring every angle, weighing every loss. 1 hour, she said. I need 1 hour. She moved through the house with the efficiency of a woman who'd been preparing to leave for 4 years without knowing it. She packed Breadwater Thomas's ring and the canteen with the arsenic traces wrapped in cloth sealed in a jar. She changed into riding clothes she hadn't worn since Thomas was alive. Then she stood at the kitchen door and looked back at the room where she'd spent 4 years singing to fill the silence. Let's go, she said. Caleb had 2 horses saddled and waiting at Martha Patterson's property. Martha herself was sitting on her porch with a shotgun across her lap. I don't know what you two are doing, Martha said, and I don't want to know. But if any man sets foot on my property while you're gone, he's going to meet the business end of my late husband's 12-gauge. Thank you, Martha, Mara said. Don't thank me. Just come back alive and bring me some of that bread when you do. They retrieved the satchel from the cellar, split the documents between their saddlebags in case one of them didn't make it, and rode west along the creek bed before cutting south toward the Carson City Road. They rode hard. They didn't speak for the first hour. The second hour, Mara pulled alongside Caleb and said, He'll send Decker. I know. Decker's faster than us. He knows the shortcuts. Then we don't take the main road. The mountain pass. It adds half a day, but Decker won't expect it. Nobody uses the mountain pass this time of year. Because it's dangerous. Because it's unexpected. 2 different things. They turned west toward the mountains. The trail was narrow and rough, and the horses didn't like it, but Caleb pushed them steady, and Mara rode with the kind of grim determination that left no room for hesitation. By nightfall, they were 12 miles from Dust Creek and climbing. They stopped to rest the horses. Mara sat on a rock and ate bread she'd baked that morning. Caleb sat across from her and did the same. I keep thinking about Thomas, she said. Caleb waited. He dug that well on the east corner. He found something, and then he died before he could tell me what. She tore off another piece of bread. What if Harlan already knows what's there? What if that's the real reason he wants the land, not the acreage, not the water, but whatever Thomas dug up? Then the land is more valuable than Harlan's letting on. Which means the forged deed isn't just fraud, it's theft of something specific. We find out what Thomas found, and we have not just a murder case but a motive. Mara nodded. After the marshal, after the warrants, we dig. They rode through the night. Caleb took the lead, navigating by stars and memory. Mara rode behind him, silent, steady, the saddlebags pressed against her horse's flank like they were carrying the weight of every wrong Dust Creek had ever swallowed. Dawn broke on the second day. They came down from the pass and hit the valley road that led to Carson City. The horses were exhausted, so were they, but they kept moving. By mid-afternoon, they saw the town. Carson City was everything Dust Creek wasn't. Loud, crowded, governed by people who answered to people above them. Caleb found the federal marshal's office on the main street. He tied the horses. He looked at Mara. Ready? I've been ready for 4 years. They walked in together. The marshal's name was Whelan. He was a compact man with gray hair and a face that had heard every kind of lie and developed a permanent squint from trying to see through them. He listened without interrupting while Mara laid the documents on his desk one by one. Thomas's letter, Greer's records, Fisher's signed confession, the Ramsey daughter's statement, the transaction records, the evidence of forged deeds, poisoned wells, burned barns, and broken fingers. Whelan read for 45 minutes. He didn't speak. He turned pages. He went back. He reread. He made notes in a leather notebook with handwriting so small it looked like insect tracks. When he finished, he set his pen down and looked at Mara. Mrs. Ellison, how long have you been carrying this? Since my husband died. The rest came together over the past 2 weeks. You're aware that if even half of this is substantiated, it constitutes the most significant land fraud case this territory has seen in a decade. I'm aware. And you're prepared to testify, personally, in front of a judge. I'm prepared to testify in front of God himself if it means Harlan Briggs answers for what he did to Thomas. Whelan looked at Caleb. And you? I'll testify to everything I've witnessed. The threats, the coercion, the sheriff's complicity. Whelan closed the notebook, opened a desk drawer, pulled out a stack of blank warrant forms. I'm going to need 3 days to verify signatures and confirm the inspection team's schedule. In the meantime, I'm assigning 2 deputy marshals to ride back to Dust Creek with you. They'll secure the property and ensure no evidence is destroyed. Harlan has men, Caleb said. So does the federal government, and ours carry badges. Whelan stood, extended his hand to Mara. Mrs. Ellison, your husband was a brave man. So are you. Mara shook his hand. Her grip was firm, her eyes were dry. My husband was a farmer who loved his land. I'm just the woman who wouldn't let it go. They left the marshal's office into late afternoon light. 2 deputy marshals, hardened men with rifles and badges, were already saddling up. Mara stood on the boardwalk and breathed. It's done, Caleb said. It started, she corrected. Done comes later. But she smiled. Small. Real. The first full smile he'd ever seen from her, and it changed her entire face, not into someone younger or softer, but into someone present. Someone who'd stepped out of the shadow of grief and into something that didn't have a name yet, but felt like daylight. They rode back to Dust Creek with the deputies. They rode hard and fast, and arrived on the 4th day to find the town exactly as they'd left it, quiet, scared, waiting for something to break. What broke was Harlan Briggs. The deputies served the warrants on a Tuesday morning. They rode to Harlan's house with the paperwork, and when Decker tried to block the door, one of the deputies put a hand on his sidearm and said, "Step aside or I'll move you. Your choice." Decker stepped aside. Harlan was in his office. The safe was open. He'd been burning documents. A pile of ash sat in the fireplace, still smoking. But the deputies had come too fast. The second set of books was still inside the safe, half pulled, caught between destruction and denial. Harlan Briggs, the lead deputy said. You are under arrest for land fraud, forgery, coercion of a public official, and suspicion of murder in the death of Thomas Ellison. Federal marshals will transport you to Carson City for arraignment. Harlan stood behind his desk. His face was the color of old milk. His hands were flat on the wood, and for the first time in anyone's memory they were shaking. This is my town, he said, quietly, like a man saying a prayer he already knew wouldn't be answered. Not anymore, the deputy said. They took him out in handcuffs. The whole town watched. Dale from the saloon, Agnes from her shop, Martha Patterson from her porch, Fisher from behind the land office window, and Pete, who'd ridden back from Silver Junction 2 days earlier, with Silas Miller beside him, both of them sunburned and road-worn, and grinning like men who'd finally found the fight they'd been drinking to forget. Mara watched from her porch. She didn't cheer, didn't cry, didn't say a word. She just stood there, Thomas's ring warm against her chest, and watched the man who killed her husband get put in a wagon and driven away. Caleb walked up the steps and stood beside her. They didn't touch. They didn't need to. It's over, he said. The legal part's just starting. The fear part's over. She considered that, looked at him. Yes, the fear part's over. That evening, after the deputies had secured Harlan's house and Decker had been taken into custody, and Sheriff Dawson had quietly resigned and walked out of town without looking back, Mara went to her kitchen. She lit the stove. She laid bread on the iron. And she opened her mouth to sing. The melody came different this time. Not the haunted hymn she'd been carrying for 4 years. Not the lullaby that sounded like grief wearing a disguise. Something new. Something she hadn't heard before because it hadn't existed until now. A melody born from a woman who'd fought for her home, buried her fear, and found against every expectation that she wasn't alone anymore. Caleb sat on the porch step. He listened. He didn't knock. After a while, the door opened behind him. Mara set a plate beside him, bread, butter, venison, and a cup of coffee. 2 cents, she said. He smiled, reached into his pocket, set 2 coins on the railing. Then he set 2 more beside them. Mara looked at the 4 coins. Looked at him. You always overpay. I always will. She sat down beside him, not across from him, not inside with the door between them. Beside him on that porch step, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Thomas's well, she said. The one on the east corner. We should dig it out. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, she agreed. They sat there in the quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't need to be filled because it's already full. 3 weeks later, they dug out Thomas's well and found what he'd been trying to tell her. A vein of silver thin, but pure running right along the property line. Worth more than Harlan's entire ranch. Worth more than every dirty deal he'd ever made. Thomas had found it and died for it, and now it belonged to the woman he'd married, and the land he'd loved. Mara stood at the edge of that well and understood finally what Thomas had meant. Don't let him take the land, because the land's the proof. The proof of murder, the proof of greed, and the proof that some things are worth more than fear. Pete stayed sober. Fisher reunited with his family. Greer got a new teaching post he couldn't write on a chalkboard, but he could lecture, and the children loved him. Silas Miller came home and rebuilt. The Ramsey's daughter visited. Dust Creek got a new sheriff, a woman named Clara Boone, who wore the star like she'd earned it because she had. And Mara Ellison kept baking bread. She sold it from her porch every morning. 2 cents a loaf. The line got longer every week, not because the town felt guilty, though some of them did, but because the bread was good and the woman who made it was no longer invisible. Caleb never made a grand confession. He never got on one knee. He never delivered a speech about love or commitment or the future. He just showed up. Every morning. Sat on that step. Ate his bread. Listened to her sing. And one morning, an ordinary morning. No different from 100 before it. Mara came out with 2 plates instead of 1, sat down beside him and said, I've been thinking. About what? About what you said that first week. That this was the first porch you'd wanted to come back to. I remember. I've decided something. What's that? You don't have to keep coming back. She looked at him, steady, clear, unguarded for the first time since he'd known her. You could just stay. Caleb held her gaze, held it the way a man holds something he's spent 6 years searching for without knowing what it looked like. I thought you'd never ask, he said. She laughed. Not the ghost of a laugh, not the almost laugh. A real laugh, full and warm and startled out of her like a bird from a bush rising into the morning air, and carrying with it every silent year, every locked door, every melody sung to an empty room. And then she sang, not to fill the silence, not to hold the walls up, not to survive. She sang because the man beside her was staying, and the bread was warm, and the land was hers, and the fear was gone, and the morning, this one ordinary unremarkable morning in Dust Creek, was the first day of a life she'd chosen instead of endured. Some people are saved by grand gestures, by speeches and proposals and dramatic rescues on horseback. Mara Ellison was saved by a man who bought bread every morning and never once asked her to stop singing. And that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything.